Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Former President Donald Trump says Americans need to start expecting and demanding bold, relentless, fearless leadership, and that he's the one who can deliver it.
We are Americans. Ambition is our heritage. Greatness is our birthright. But as long as our energies are spent fighting each other, our destiny will remain out of reach.
Projecting unity while relying on derision.
We're dealing with very tough, very fierce people. They're fierce people. And we don't have fierce people. We have people that are a lot less than fierce, except when it comes to cheating on elections.
And making pie-in-the-sky promises.
We're going to get to the cure for cancer and Alzheimer's and so many other things. I will end the devastating inflation crisis immediately, bring down interest rates, and lower the cost of energy.
His nomination at the Republican National Convention coming within a week of an attempt on Trump's life. Meanwhile, Illinois' minority party strives for relevance.
We are not the party of division and divisiveness. We are the party of hope and optimism and a better Illinois and a better future for America.
And with only a month before Chicago is set to host the Democratic National Convention, who the party will nominate to face Trump is an open question.
Joining us for our Week in Review panel are a lot of our WTTW news reporters. That includes Nick Blumberg, Heather Sharon, and Matt Masterson, part of our convention coverage team. Also joined by Midwest correspondent for The Economist, Daniel Knowles, who's also in Milwaukee for the RNC. So let's get to it. Daniel, gonna go with you. For starters, Trump wants it back in the White House. Did he make a strong case for that?
I think there was a lot of anticipation of the speech. I was obviously a lot of stuff about it was going to be a new Trump. And then it was kind of the same old Trump. I've seen that speech, and particularly what was fun being in the room was watching the teleprompter and then watching it stop, while he then kind of riffed off on why the president of Hungary is the Prime Minister of Hungary is so great, or Hannibal Lecter, the late great, various things like that. So I think it was perhaps disappointing to Republicans who'd been really hoping for this big kind of barnstorming thing that would change, or at least boost him forth into the stratosphere and make him seem absolutely unbelievably up top. It was the same Donald Trump.
Heather, does that matter? If you're a Donald Trump fan, did you still love the speech, even if it's one you'd perhaps heard something very similar to before?
Sure. If you are all in on Donald Trump, not only had you heard that speech before, you have signed up for that entire sort of very dark description of America and sort of our society, and that was something that you agree with. Now, if you're a swing voter in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, perhaps Arizona or Georgia, I think it's an open question as to whether that message is really going to come across, because, we all sort of chuckled a little bit at Daniel mentioning Hannibal Lecter. That is not a normal topic for a convention speech. And let's be clear, he was referring to Hannibal Lecter because he continues to spread this, what we have to say is a flat-out lie, that Venezuela and other South American countries are emptying their asylums and sending criminals north or across our southern border, and that's just simply false. And it is part of sort of this divisiveness that I think many Republicans were hoping to sort of paper over or perhaps push back into the shadows. Trump put it right in the spotlight, and I think that this is sort of the dilemma the news media has been dealing with, since 2015. It's hilarious on some level that he's mentioning Hannibal Lecter, right? But he
ridiculous,
is
right?
Mm-hmm. He is demonizing a whole group of people who are coming to America, and many have requested asylum because of economic catastrophe or persecution. And he's saying that they're murderers and other rapists, and this is exactly the debate we started as he came down that escalator in Trump Tower, at least I think a century and a half ago at this point.
So there was a lot of buildup that this was going to be a message of inclusion and that there would be a message of unity. Before we get too much further, let's hear from Trump himself, because he did do that to a degree.
As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America.
So, Nick, there was some of that. Again, is there enough within this speech, within this perhaps redefined Trump, if that's in fact what the campaign is going for, to get to these moderates who maybe say, I'm not happy with how things are going. All right, I'll try him again.
I think that's going to be a tough road for the Trump campaign, because we did in the first 10 or 15 minutes hear from someone who was perhaps more reflective, speaking about faith, speaking about his feeling that God spared him from being killed. But then he pretty quickly veered off into sort of a greatest hits, as we've all mentioned, things that we've heard before. And I do think, the idea of unity is interesting, because certainly within that room, within that convention hall, there's a great deal of unity, because the GOP has become the party of Trump, and the folks who don't necessarily support Trump have been marginalized or purged. So it's, the idea that, yes, we had this great convention week, we're all unified, we're all behind the former president and his re-election bid. That's true when it comes to the RNC, but that's because there isn't really much, division within the folks who are at that convention.
They're the delegates by very nature.
Exactly.
You're going to be the tried and true.
But even in 2016, there were still folks who didn't, there were, never Trumpers that kind of stuck to their guns and said, no, this is not the candidate that we want. This isn't the kind of values that we think our party should have. So it's interesting to see, they're unified as a party, and this is a message we heard from Illinois Republicans throughout the week as well. But the question is, are they sort of preaching to the choir here, and is this going to break through, especially when you see him going off script and playing to the room, which is something that is part of his political gifts, but it's not necessarily going to break through.
And yet,
I was
Heather,
just going to say that Nick's point is really well taken, because in 2016 we had Texas Senator Ted Cruz from the floor of the convention telling delegates to vote their conscience, even if it didn't mean sort of nominating Trump officially. At this convention, Ted Cruz was
on
in.
stage.
Not only was he on stage, he was in the Trump family box, which is an indication that he had sort of bent the knee, as I think said. Now, by the other hand, we have a new vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio. Why? Well, because the former Vice President Mike Pence, not only was he not at the convention, he was in the wilds of Montana, judging by his social media, but of course, Donald Trump stands accused of fomenting the January 6th Capitol insurrection, and there were people there calling for Mike Pence to be hanged. I think that has gotten a little bit lost in the pageantry of the convention. It is unprecedented, a word I have truly come to loathe, that we have a former vice president, not supporting his former running mate in an election, and not only not supporting him, but not being welcome at the convention.
He would have been booed out again.
Correct.
Yeah. It's not only him. Moderate Republicans who are there, they feel like they've been pushed into their own party. It's no longer the party of Reagan or what it had been for so long. They feel like they're on an island. They don't want to vote for Joe Biden, but they definitely don't want to vote for Donald Trump as well, and they don't see another option to go towards right now, and they're trying to figure out what that path ahead is for this party if the Republican Party is just going to be the party of Donald Trump going forward.
Daniel.
I mean, this is what I was struck by. This was my first convention, my first American convention. This was kind of curiously without politics, in the sense of,
Correct.
there were very few kind of fringe meetings. Nobody was around the edges talking about, okay, what do we as Republicans think about education policy or whatever. They all agreed on the first day before I even got there what the platform was, and it was this one-page document. And apparently, they were all the delegates had their phones taken away and they weren't allowed to coordinate. The entire thing was, whatever you think, you talk about how great Trump is and how he supports him. And I don't know if Republicans all agree with the entire kind of platform. There's a lot of people there, if you really push them, perhaps after a couple of drinks late in the evening, they're like, they like free trade, and he's like offering tariffs on everything.
Did you get anybody to actually say that?
Well, not in
After
a way
a couple
that I
of
could
drinks,
write
perhaps.
it down.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's like certainly people were like, well. Most of the people I met were still very we think Trump is a good guy. We think that they will get things done. They were Republicans. They believed that, but it was they were putting aside but they were putting aside their own views on how the world should work and what policies should be imposed. I mean, this is our guy, and we believe in the party, and we trust him. So that came out.
And it's much more of a party of personality than a party of politics. You know, you're not seeing policy discussions, to your point, happening here. And, you know, conventions for a long time have essentially been a TV show, you know, a big party.
An infomercial.
Exactly, a big party for, you know, the folks to come together and hang out. And that's been true of, you know, the Democrats and the Republicans. You know, they don't really have that much of an official role anymore in our electoral system, but this really was, you know, to a remarkable degree, pretty policy-free in a lot of ways. Although certainly there were, you know, a great deal of things in the speeches.
Yeah, so let's actually hear some of that. This was a marathon speech, so in an hour and a half, you're going to get some policy. Much of that focused on sort of routine Trump hot topics, including a familiar anti-immigrant rhetoric.
Under the current administration, we are indeed a nation in decline. As we sit here in this beautiful arena, it's a massive invasion at our southern border that has spread misery, crime, poverty, disease, and destruction to communities all across our land.
And Heather, this has to be a message that strikes heart in the fear of immigrant communities, many of whom live in Chicago.
Yeah, I think that the image that I think will stick for me from Wisconsin will be the image of the delegates waving the mass deportation signs. You know, there was a lot of talk about, well, yeah, Trump is saying that he wants to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, but how exactly would that work, and would he actually do it? And he probably doesn't actually mean it, but they mean it. And they had pre-printed signs saying mass deportation now. And I think that's something that we have to take very seriously and literally. It would, even if not a single person is deported because they're undocumented, it will strike fear into the hearts of Chicago's immigrant communities. It means they will be less likely to reach out to the police for help or to get health care or to any way interact with sort of officialdom for fear that they would be sort of identified as sort of somebody who needs to be deported. And this is sort of above and beyond the notion of putting people awaiting deportations in camps along the southern border. This is not something that Trump is sort of, you know, hinting at or sort of signaling at. He is saying that this is what he wants to do, and it's something that we have to take very seriously about what it will mean for people, particularly like in cities like Chicago that have huge numbers of undocumented residents.
Well, and Nick, we heard as well in an earlier clip from the former president, suspicions about election cheating, presumably focused, of course, on his loss 4 years ago. So tell me about that. Is he already setting up for, if I don't win?
I think he has to be, because I think he saw that that was a successful message in 2020 in riling up his supporters, you know, to the degree that we saw an attempted insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So I think, you know, he is setting the table for this come November should President Joe Biden or another Democratic nominee, you know, take the election. I think he wants to, you know, create that path now and start to, you know, to get his supporters on board with that idea.
And it is a message that we heard the Illinois Republican Party endorse full-heartedly. Both you and I spoke to a number of delegates and party leaders who expressed serious concerns about election integrity, even though there is no evidence that voter fraud has been determinative in any election in Illinois or basically anywhere else in America. And I think that that is a real sort of problem for democracy, because if you have one side saying, well, we're not sure this is a valid election, and you have another side saying, you know, we're going to play by the rules, there's an asymmetry there that I think is potentially perilous for American democracy.
So Daniel, how does this play out on the world stage?
One thing that, you know, the Trump going onto stage, he was preceded by Kid Rock and by Hulk Hogan, and you know, I have to say, if you were trying to invent the most kind of stereotypical image of America, you know, the most snobbish sort of Frenchman could imagine, want to believe this is what it would be: a reality TV president introduced by a WrestleMania star,
who literally ripped open his shirt on stage. Yes.
But I think, you know, there's a lot of fear in general about, you know, in European capitals certainly about. Particularly what Trump's policy on Ukraine and on Putin might be. You know, he went off from his script and he name-checked or Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and of course, this is a guy who's like seen among all other European leaders as kind of a Russian mole almost in a way. So I think there's a lot of nerves at the moment, and everybody's waiting to see what happens with the Democratic
But Daniel,
I thought it was interesting to hear too. Trump mentioned in his speech, that had I been president, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine, which strikes me as a claim not backed up necessarily by the evidence.
I was going to say, Daniel, back to you. I mean, not only that, he said that he could pick up a phone and end a war. We heard from him that perhaps cancer may be cured if he is president, Alzheimer's as well. Are these promises that are believable and helpful, or what does it show about the voting public?
I mean, I think that the foreign policy is one of those things that almost by cliche never really impacts elections, even when America is at a war. And I think, one of the things that very struck me, I used to cover Afghanistan in my previous job, and I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan in the final year. And the way he's redefined it as this, like, Joe Biden lost the war and he would have held on when he signed the deal with the Taliban to withdraw.
Invited them to Camp David on September 11th.
There's this kind of ability to just brazen through this kind of foreign policy worldview that is
like you use whiteout over history almost.
And the Russians were still in Syria the whole time he was in.
And yet Republicans left, those that I talked to, truly excited, said, we believe he is on the path to the presidency. So we're going to get to that and his potential Democratic rival anyway in just a minute. But I want to step outside the inside the convention hall and go to you, Matt, because you were covering what was going on outside of it. And what were your impressions of the security?
Security was very strong. Obviously, what happened last weekend made the Secret Service take another look at what they wanted to do to keep the former president and all the delegates and everyone there safe. But in terms of security, everything felt very secure. Everything was very safe. Protesters had no fear of any sort of retaliatory violence that was going to be happening. Ones I spoke to were very calm. They felt that it was going to be more of a celebration for Republicans who were there as opposed to attacking any protesters who disagreed with what they had to say. And that's largely how it played out. Police presence was very strong in the city, but not overwhelming. There were no issues. Arrests were very minor. There were a few arrests made each night, but in general, things went very calmly. And going to the DNC next month, where the Chicago Police Department is going to be running things, they would have to hope that this is how things would go here as well.
Now, Daniel, speaking of course, last weekend, what is the impact of this attempted assassination on the race for president?
I think it's not all that much. I think that perhaps, I was sent out to report on it, and at the point, day after, we really didn't know who this kid was, this guy, but almost nothing's emerged, and the FBI have searched his phone and stuff now, and he was a Republican, but who knows? But essentially, there was no great screed that allowed it to kind of get into the public discourse and keep talking about, what motivated this young man to go and shoot at a president, and so it's kind of almost disappeared. And I think, what polling we've seen so far, there's almost nothing. And certainly, I was saying this to my editors when it happened. I thought, being here in Chicago, obviously a very democratic city, and my friends arrived and I said, Donald Trump's been shot at. And they said, well, was he hit? And I said, well, no. And so, not in a kind of sad way, actually, not that, but more in just a well, who cares kind of way. It was like, well, he's alive.
He's safe.
Right.
Move on.
Exactly.
You're saying.
Yeah, and I think that there's just a very. I think that this is very quickly, we're moving on from this attempted assassination, as serious as it was.
We've got to move on to the DNC, but just real quick, do you agree, Heather?
I do. I think that we've decided that the person responsible for this is your garden variety school shooter who had perhaps mental and emotional problems. And we know that he was searching not just for Donald Trump, but also for the Democratic National Convention and for Joe Biden. It really sounded like he wanted to shoot a high-profile person, and Trump just happened to come within 50 miles of his house and then escape serious injury by millimeters. Yes.
Certainly a belief by many at the RNC that he was spared out because of a directive from God, really. Correct. From on high to help America. Now let's move on. Focusing so much, of course, on Trump. This was the Republicans' big week, but the question really does remain, Nick, who will Trump run against? is it going to be President Biden? There have been some additional developments along here with pressure intensifying for him to move aside.
And there has been quite a bit, and it does seem as though this maybe is some sort of a at least loosely coordinated attempt to take what had been, private concerns, private grievances, and make them more and more public with each, elected official that comes out, with each apparent leak about the conversations from congressional leaders and other, sort of party grandees that have been making their concerns known. There was reporting that there was a very last-minute call to get, with donors that was thrown together this afternoon that Vice President Kamala Harris was on. And this certainly was reflected in, what we heard at the RNC. There was a fair amount of focus on, what they see as President Joe Biden's failures, but they spent a lot of time, the speaker spent a lot of time attacking Kamala Harris, seemingly with an eye toward the notion that she may actually be the one at the top of the ticket for the Dems in November. So she took a lot of hit, especially for border-related issues. They kept referring to her as the quote-unquote border czar, which she has not actually been designated as, but certainly that has been a big part of her vice presidential policy portfolio. This notion of mass deportations, the so-called border bloodbath. They really tried to hang a lot of negative attributes around Harris's neck.
Well, and we do have additionally Illinois representatives Sean Casten as well as Jesus Chuy Garcia adding to the list of those saying that they believe that is Joe Biden needs to be replaced because they don't want Trump back in the White House. Daniel, again, to you here, there's so much fear among these vocal Democrats that Biden is going to lose the race for the White House. Are they hurting their own cause by?
I think it depends on whether they succeed in getting Joe Biden to step aside. If he does step aside and they can get another candidate, perhaps Vice President Harris, but somebody who can essentially make everything move, turn it back into a referendum on Trump, then I think they succeed. But if obviously Joe Biden carries on as the nominee, then yes, they will end up having hurt their own cause. So it's horrible. The game theory of it's fascinating.
Heather, play that out a little bit more. Take us to the next step.
Right. Well, because if you have Democrats making the case that Biden is not sort of fit not only to run for president, but serve another 4 years, you're going to have some voters say, well, why would I vote for him then? And either they vote for Trump or more likely, I think they simply stay home. And I think that is potentially perilous for the Democrats because we expect this race to be just as close as it was in 2020 and then again in 2016. So the question really is, can the Democrats sort of figure this out quicker than they have been, and certainly by either the Democratic National Convention or the first week in August, when there is apparently a virtual roll call scheduled to get the Democratic nominee both on the Ohio ballot and other states where the ballot filing deadline is a little bit early. I think what was interesting to me today was that with Chuy Garcia and sort of calling for to step back, he is a strong member of the Progressive caucuses, and up until this point, the Progressives have been firmly behind Biden. If that starts to change, I think we're sort of entering a new phase of this debate.
Well, Daniel, is this because of the debate performance or is this because of polls? Polls go up and down. We're a time away from November.
I think it's a bit of both. I think, he was a little bit behind in the polls, but obviously polls, and there's a huge obsession with polls, but there was a great hope, I suppose, that, that he would be able to turn the attention onto Trump and make it a referendum on Trump. And then, of course, the debate happened and he looked very ill. He struggled with certain questions. And suddenly it was a debate on, is this man too old? Can he do another 4 years? And I think that's very, very hard to change. So, if he were 10 points ahead in the polls, he probably could have survived that debate. But as it was, he needed to improve things.
And Nick, to you, we've got about a minute left. Illinois Republicans, they're in the super minority in Illinois, but did they have a chance at changing that around? They say yes?
Yeah, we heard a lot of optimism this week that they can pick up seats in the General Assembly, that they may add Republicans to the Illinois congressional delegation. I think a lot is going to come down to whether voters are so, have such distaste for the candidates at the top of the ticket that they simply stay home, because I think it's going to be about turnout, and I think that is very much predicated upon who the two candidates end up being. Certainly Trump isn't going anywhere. He is not considering stepping down. So he's not stepping off that debate, that RNC stage. But
we will be following what happens with him, but of course mostly with the future of Biden and his potential path to a second term. With that, we are out of time. So our thanks to Nick Blumberg, Heather Sharon, Matt Masterson and to Daniel Knowles. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr, BNSF Railway, Francine and Dr. Anthony Brown, and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism. Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by...
And that's our show for this Friday night. Weather forecast looking pretty great for this weekend. So if you want to get out and check out what's going on, look to our website for a list of summer festivals. That's at WTTW.com/news. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a good night. Now, Matt, I want to get to you because we talked about security, but there was, in fact, a man shot, and it was by an out-of-state police officer. Why is that significant?
It was multiple out-of-state police officers from Columbus, Ohio. They were working outside of the security perimeter. They didn't have jurisdiction out there as Milwaukee police. They weren't handling a call for service. They were out there debriefing about protest events that were going on inside the security zone. The plan for Chicago police is that they're only going to have Chicago police officers working outside for the DNC. It's going to be all out of town, out of state police officers who are coming to Chicago working inside the security zone. So they hope that people who are more familiar with the area, they have a better knowledge of the different communities around the area, can help prevent.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.